Okay, so let's do the Q and the G. I'm going to, well, first of all, I'm going to make this into a guide, but before I do that, I'm going to do a Command C for copy, and I'll just paste it over here somewhere. The tail is what I'm interested of the Q, and the O obviously will line up just fine, so I'll move this in position, and I'll hold my Shift key down and let it constrain. And I'm just letting it center itself, and I'm holding the Option key down as well to make a copy of it so I don't lose my original O. Now I'm going to come back over here. Oh, before I forget, I'll select that. I'll do a Command 5 or a Control 5 on a PC to make it into a guide. And I'm interested in just this stroke right in here. So let me zoom in here. And this is what I want. So I'm going to just try to sneak in there and just select that. Maybe a little higher. There we go. So now I'm going to do a Command C for copy, and I don't need that anymore. And I'll paste my stroke. I don't need this point on it. I don't need that point on it. I'm going to reverse it out so it's a stroke. And while it's selected, I'm going to go to my transparency settings, Command F10 on a Mac. Actually, that's stroke, but there's transparency. It's Shift Command 10 is the transparency, and I'm going to make that 100%. And I'm OK, and let's back away, Command 0. And I'm going to move this in the general neighborhood. Now it's worth noting that the tail lines up exactly with the right side of the Q. You can see that that lines up. So I'm going to need to do the same thing with this side. If I were to pick the center of the Q in here, it looks like it might be somewhere in there. My only concern is that I want to put this tail in there, then have it stick out like by a lot. So let me zoom in here. And so I'll back away one click. Okay, so I'm going to put this there and let it snap to that point. And like I said before, this stroke in here is what I'm concerned about. So this is an interesting trick. I mean, I could bring in a guide and drop it in there, but if I pull this way, way, way out here, and I'm holding the Shift key down, there we go. And so it constrains horizontally. Now if I bring it back in, and if I hold the Shift key down, I'm locking to this point over here, but I hold the Shift key down, that constrains it. So it's actually lining up to the side of the Q, and that gets me to that right length. That wouldn't have worked if if it wasn't that far away. If I were a lot closer and I tried to move that here, and then if I try to hold the Shift key down over here, it just goes to the next longest point, so that's not going to work. So I'm going to do an undo and get it back to where it was. So again, this is the trick here. Hold it way out, and sometimes you need to go even super far. But as long as this angle becomes shallower than what you're clicking on, it'll line up correctly. So now I just put that over there, hold the Shift key down, and it constrains to where I want it. So anyway, there's my Q. And it looks fine, and I don't think I'm going to have to worry about this doing an overshoot on the bottom, because the same way the descender, the tail on the Q essentially defines the boundary below the baseline, I think we're okay. All right, so now the G. The G has this little cut in here that's part of the spur, and it's essentially there for visual reasons, and you'll see it change as soon as I make a variation of this. You won't see this one change, but you'll see how the letter will change when I start to make my variation thicker. So again, I'm pulling this out. I'm holding the Option key down to make a copy. Don't need the G in any one way or another, so I'm going to go ahead and do a Command 5. And now I got to worry about where I'm going to make these cuts. So let me zoom in here. And so right about there would be fine. So I'm going to do a C. That's the shortcut for my scissors tool. And I'm going to clip right there where that intersection is. I'm going to come over here and clip right here with that other one. Now I already know that this is too high and too low, but it's a starting point. It's going to look a little weird because the stroke is so thin. I'll hold the Option key down, so now I've only got that line. Now I can delete it. Okay, so now I'm going to create a rectangle that it continues down from this corner down to the spur, and then it's also going to give me my horizontal bar on the G. So I'm just going to do it with a rectangle, and I'm going to grab my direct selection tool, select that bottom point, delete it. Now I still have a center point associated with this rectangle, so I'm going to get rid of it. So I'll go to my attributes, and I'm going to open up more options, show all, and there it is right there. This defines the center dot. Turn that off. Okay, now I can grab both of these and get them to snap to that point. There it is. At least I think it is. Let me check in here. I'm going to move it up, click in here and move it over. Do that again. So grab that point, and there it is. I'm locked in. Okay, back to 0. Now this line in here needs to be even with the baseline, and that's essentially what's going to become my spur on the G. So I'm just holding the Shift key down and dragging that down. Okay, so if I do a Command semicolon or a Control semicolon, I suspect on a PC it'll hide the guides, and I can start to see what's going on with the letters. And I really think that this needs to be a little bit higher. Let me do a Command K and double check my steps for my pixel. So I'm going to change that to a number 1. Hit return. And now I can give me a few clicks there to the top. And I can also send this down a little bit lower. But the proof of the pudding will be how it sits with all the other letters. And that's what I need to do when I start bringing these together. So I'm going to wrap up the rest of the letters off camera, and it might be a little bit before I catch up to put in the final installation of this video, but I just want to show you real quick potentially how some of the manipulations can be altered. So I'm going to select the letter G. In fact, I'll select all my characters, and I think I'm going to make this C a little bit higher as well. And I might even be able to get rid of that point. No, I don't want to get rid of that point. The reason I don't want to get rid of that point is because this has got a slight curve. So I don't know where to cut it, so I'm just going to randomly cut it right now just so that I have an example. But I already copied this to my larger file, so I don't have to worry about ruining it. So C, and I'll cut it there, select all, and I'll cut this one over there. And then I'll grab these guys in between and delete those out. So that might look like a better C. And it needs some adjustment, no doubt. Okay, so I'll select all of these. Actually, I'll turn my D into a guide, and it's going to disappear as soon as I make it into a guide because the guides are hidden. Okay, so it's gone. And I'll move these a little bit closer. And that's starting to look okay. All right, so I'll select all of these. I'm going to grab my stroke, which is Command F10, and I'm going to select the direct selection tool, the white arrow. Now I'm going to do a Command H or a Control H if you're on a PC, and everything's still selected, but now with the stroke I can come in here and add some girth to it. Now you can see what's happening to the letter G down here. As this is getting bigger, I would have to manually go in and modify that, and possibly also the tail. But for now, you can get a sense of what's going on with the letters in terms of how they're how you can potentially manipulate them. So let me switch over to my selection tool. Letter A gave me that. And this guy, I'm going to drop it down a little bit. Let's increase that stroke a little bit more so. So that looks good. Get that again. And I'm going to do Command K and drop my pixel distance to 0.5 again, so I can do smaller increments. And that looks good from my perspective. That's not bad. But look what happens when I make it even bigger than that. So I'm going to just pick on the G right now. So we're going to increase that. See what's happening down here on the bottom? And even if I had that point a little bit lower, and I'll put it way lower, if I come over here and I increase the point size, you can see that eventually, I'll have to select everything again. You can see eventually that if it were to block out really big, it looks kind of cumbersome right in here. And yeah, I can make my stroke a little bit thinner, but it's going to interfere where this one ends. So then this stroke over here is going to have to move to the left so that this line can look straight. Then I'm going to have this big giant block here. And so it looks like a job in here for a little cut in here that would help define my spur on the G. But aside from making those little modifications, this is working out really quite nicely. And you don't have to have that business with the contrast between the strokes if the type is thin enough. If the type is really thin, uh, the making up for the optical illusion that potentially horizontal strokes look thicker than the vertical strokes, and then you have to offset this stroke. You don't have to worry about that when the type is really small. Anyway, other things that you can do that I think are kind of quite fun is when you select the width tool, and let me come over here and I'm going to kind of add some serifs on it. That can modify the letters in a very unusual way, and as long as everything is consistent, and I'll do that over here, so I've got the width tool. As long as everything is consistent, whoops, I thought I had the width tool. Uh, it potentially gives you a possible direction for making interesting solutions. And it's fun to play with, and already it's starting to look like something that could easily work. And I'll grab my direct selection tool. I'll pop that up a little bit higher. So I'm looking for this to end on the baseline over here. Actually, it would go on wherever the baseline is. Once you get the text thick enough, you're going to have to you will need an overshoot on the bottom of the letter, which means that you're going to bring this up a little bit. Because if they were even, then the round part of the bowl here on the bottom is going to feel like it's a little too short. Well, I'll give it the old college try. Hopefully I'll be done sooner than later to finish the rest of the letters. But I've got other projects that are in the fire right now that I have to take care of. So I'll try to get to the wrapping up the letters, but I think I've given you guys enough to work with in relationship of how to modify the letters. So take care, and hopefully you'll hear from me soon.